Hello, and welcome back to the War of Ideas podcast. Well, it certainly has been a while, but I'm not keeping score, and I hope you aren't either. Alright, we're going to talk about meritocracy today. Why do most liberals think that America is not a meritocracy? And if we could have a meritocracy to our liking, what would it look like? If we could fine-tune the dial for a perfectly meritocratic society, how would we do it? And how would a perfectly fair system hold up? And right off the bat, just to clear things up, do I think we live in a meritocracy in the current day and age? In a nutshell, yes. But before you get angry at me, of course I admit there are exceptions. And of course these exceptions stand out because of course dumb, rich, famous people stand out in society. But people like that are few and far between. They just take up a lot more space in our media landscape. In reality, most upper-class people work more hours and are more intelligent than the rest of us. They also put in a lot of effort to get ahead in life, and so do their parents. And that effort is aimed precisely where it will get the most benefits, which is something a lot of other people do not know how to do or cannot do. Here's the definition of meritocracy: the holding of power by people selected on the basis of their ability. In colloquial terms, I'd describe a meritocracy as a society where there is equality of opportunity, a society that rewards the smartest and most hardworking of us, thereby encouraging everybody to study and work hard to receive a bigger reward. That sounds like a society we would want to live in. Almost everyone loves when perseverance is rewarded. But our society is far from a perfect meritocracy today. We have things like inheritance, capital gains on wealth that begets more wealth for minimal work, people being rewarded for work that does not benefit society, nepotism, legacy admissions to universities, racist and sexist bias, and so on. There's plenty of things that can get us ahead in life without intelligence or hard work. Things that we see as unfair advantages when it comes to getting ahead. Things that ruin our ideal world of equality of opportunity. But raising capital gains taxes, or eliminating legacy admissions, or getting rid of any of these unfair advantages that most liberals are in favor of, will introduce a new problem. I shouldn't say a new problem, though, because it isn't new and has always existed. But this problem has been sliding under the radar forever, and if we fix the unfair advantages in life, and if we fine-tune the dial for a perfectly meritocratic society, for intelligence and hard work to be the only things that matter, this problem will rear its ugly head, and it'll be hard to come to terms with. Sure, it'd be amazing if every smug asshole had less money than kind and caring people did. If every Trump or Kanye never even became rich in the first place, because it would finally require hard work and intelligence, if that poor mother of 3 who works 12 hours a day could get rewarded for her hard work. These are the nice, cozy thoughts we have when we think of the world becoming more fair. The problem, though, is that meritocracy does not reduce income inequality or inequality of opportunity. But it's not just that. A meritocratic society justifies inequality. The two go hand in hand. Meritocracy and inequality. We normally think of ourselves as being both pro-meritocracy and being in favor of reducing income inequality. But when scrutinized further, our utopia of fairness crumbles. Income inequality wouldn't just continue if we had a true meritocracy. The worst part is, it will feel justified by those at the top who earned it. We will no longer have the excuses of nepotism, legacy admissions, or inheritance to fall back on. Without these excuses, the people who have the money in a fair society surely must have earned it, and the people who don't have money in a fair society surely must have earned that. Meritocracy is a justification for inequality. Again, meritocracy is a justification for inequality. Here's Michael Sandel on this issue. He teaches political philosophy at Harvard University. From the year 2020, way back when.
Those who landed on top came to believe that their success was their own doing, a measure of their merit, and that those who lost out had no one to blame but themselves. This way of thinking about success arises from a seemingly attractive principle. If everyone has an equal chance, the winners deserve their winnings. This is the heart of the meritocratic ideal. In practice, of course, we fall far short. Not everybody has an equal chance to rise. Children born to poor families tend to stay poor when they grow up. Affluent parents are able to pass their advantages on to their kids. At Ivy League universities, for example, there are more students from the top 1% than from the entire bottom half of the country combined. But the problem isn't only that we fail to live up to the meritocratic principles we proclaim. The ideal itself is flawed. It has a dark side. Meritocracy is corrosive of the common good. It leads to hubris among the winners and humiliation among those who lose out. It encourages the successful to inhale too deeply of their success, to forget the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way. And it leads them to look down on those less fortunate, less credentialed than themselves. This matters for politics. One of the most potent sources of the populist backlash is the sense among many working people that elites look down on them. It's a legitimate complaint. Even as globalization brought deepening inequality and stagnant wages, its proponents offered workers some bracing advice. If you want to compete and win in the global economy, go to college. What you earn depends on what you learn. You can make it if you try. These elites missed the insult implicit in this advice. If you don't go to college, if you don't flourish in the new economy, your failure is your fault. That's the implication.
Because of the implication. And after that, here's a quote from the book The Cult of Smart by deBoer. He says, "Meritocracy simply shuffles the decks of who succeeds compared to earlier systems of privilege, and not as much as you might believe. The game is still rigged, it just justifies itself with an empty rhetoric of freedom and fairness." And why not a third quote in a row? Here's Thomas Nagel from his book Mortal Questions. He writes, "When racial and sexual injustice have been reduced, we shall still be left with the great injustice of the smart and the dumb, who are so differently rewarded for comparable effort. This would be an injustice even if the system of differential economic and social rewards had no systematic sexual or racial reflection. He wrote that in 1979, by the way. Wow. Even in a world where sexism and racism and any other ism you can think of didn't exist, we'd still have inequality in a merit-based system. And if you think about it, isn't that what college is really for? College is the engine of inequality. College is not the great equalizer. It's the great separator. To be more specific, the reason people say college is an equalizer is because the difference between going to college and not going to college, that leap from not going to going, that puts you on an even playing field with the other people who go to college, theoretically. You know, it's the barrier to entry. You're allowed to play the game, right? You're allowed to have your horizons broadened. But once you're there, it is all about separation. It is all about picking the best students from the worst students. Picking the best future workers from the worst future workers. College is the great separation and sorting of students, of future employees, into hierarchies based on intelligence or based on work ethic. And nobody in college is equal. I mean, you can have the same GPA down to the decimal point, but you're not going to have the same extracurriculars and volunteer activities. And that's the entire point. Is it not? Students want to differentiate themselves. They want to prove how they're unique, how they are different from all the other students. I just saw an article about some girl who got into Harvard and her admissions essay started with, "I was born in prison." Yeah, that's one hell of a story. Is that why she got in? I'm sure she probably had great SAT scores too. But why does that story matter? She gets +1 point over the person who didn't get born in prison because it's out of the ordinary. What are college essays for? What do people write about in college essays? They write unique stories to separate themselves from their competition. And what do people talk about in interviews and on their resumes? They do the same thing. They try to differentiate themselves from the rest and prove why they're the best. This is the sorting system we would be left with in a world without nepotism and every other unfair thing you can think of. We'd have equality of opportunity and not equality of outcome. When the outcome is unequal in today's society, we have an easy scapegoat. We blame racial bias, nepotism, inheritance, tax evasion, you name it. And these things absolutely do exist. But if we lived in a world where they didn't exist, where we abolish them, where we create true equality of opportunity, we have no more scapegoats to blame when we discover there are still unequal outcomes. As Nagel says, we will be left with the great injustice of the smart and the dumb. When we strip away the roadblocks of equality of opportunity and find out that equality of opportunity does not lead to equality of outcomes, what do we do? What do we do when there's still poor people, when there's still homeless people? And this is the real issue. I know most people don't think that they want equality of outcomes, and they have the excuse of, oh, we just want equality of opportunity. That's all we want. That seems reasonable. That's that's something both sides can agree on. Equality of opportunity. But when it comes down to it, when you think about stuff like this, progressives and liberals, they're gonna want the world to look different even if we did have equality of opportunity. Because there's still gonna be people living in poverty, and we're still gonna want to help them out. It's just not in the Overton window right now to say, I'm for equality of outcomes. Because you will be labeled a communist, and no one will take you seriously, and no one will vote for you if that's your platform to run for office. In an article by Daniel Markovits, author of The Meritocracy Trap, he writes that, on average, children whose parents make more than $200,000 a year score about 250 points higher on the SAT than children whose parents make $40,000 to $60,000 a year. Only about 1 in 200 children from the poorest third of households achieves SAT scores at Yale's median. And this fits with what Michael Sandel said earlier about more people being represented at Ivy League colleges from the 1% than the bottom half. There's one of your injustices that we can't erase. But it's not just socioeconomic status tipping the scales. At some point, progressives have to face the fact that intelligence is more prevalent among the rich, money and intelligence have a reciprocal relationship, and that intelligence is affected by genetics as well. It shouldn't be taboo to admit. Just as it's okay to admit when your daughter isn't the best player on the soccer field in her gym class, it should be okay to admit that some kids are better at reading comprehension, or math, or science than others. Steven Pinker wrote a book on this in 2002 called The Blank Slate. People are not blank slates when they are born. It is not all nurture. It is a mix of nature and nurture. Here's more about this point from Freddie deBoer in The Cult of Smart. Quote, had she said that her son didn't have an artist's temperament, had she said that he would never be an athlete, had she said that he didn't have an ear for music, I never would have thought twice about it. It's only with intelligence that we have such massive hang-ups. Only intelligence that we treat as the sole criterion of someone's worth. And it's that ugly little piece of ideology, the cult of smart, that makes our blank slate thinking not only factually wrong, but actively cruel. Because if we really are all equally equipped at birth to succeed in academics, and all that comes with them, then it suggests that those who have struggled and failed in those domains deserved it. If you have lost out in the great American race up the ladder, failing to make it to some elite college and therefore to the financial and social capital that such an education brings, you must have been too lazy. End quote. And he even touches on the reluctance of liberals to talk about genetics. Quote, a belief in the role of genetics fits with left-wing belief far more comfortably than the alternative. It is the left, after all, that stresses the vagaries of chance, that insists that factors we can't control play an outsized role in determining our life outcomes. When it comes to being overweight, for example, or in the case of mental illness, progressive people tend to believe that it's biology, not willpower, that plays the largest role. Everyone understands that, in the domain of athletics, we are most certainly not born equal in ability. But this thinking is anathema when applied to academic aptitude. End quote. The liberal, progressive vision of meritocracy is like if we took laissez-faire capitalism for businesses and applied it to individuals. Give everyone a level playing field and say, may the smartest, most hardworking person win. May the odds be ever in your favor. Under laissez-faire capitalism, we don't just want the most clever and cutthroat corporation to hoard all the money, just like we shouldn't want the same at the level of the individual. So in this episode, I am sending out a plea to fellow progressives that we need to change course on the idea of a meritocracy. Having equality of opportunity is a good goal that we should strive towards, but there needs to be some foresight here. We need to continue to install safeguards for the people who are less intelligent or less hardworking than others, or both. Equality of opportunity is important, but I think a social safety net to lessen economic inequality of outcomes is not only more important, but easier to implement. Getting rid of things like people's own personal biases against other groups, getting rid of inheritance, legacy admissions to universities, nepotism, which are all examples of inequality of opportunity, is likely an impossible task. But giving money to people to lessen inequality of outcomes is something the government can and already does do. What sounds easier to you? Having the government cut people checks? Or eliminating racism, sexism, and parents' desires to pass on their wealth to their children? Alright, here's another quote, this time from Sam Harris. He's talking about free will, actually, not equality of opportunity, but the words still fit well, and I think teach an important point. Quote, liberals tend to understand that a person can be lucky or unlucky in all matters relevant to his or her success. Conservatives, however, often make a religious fetish of individualism. Many seem to have absolutely no awareness of how fortunate one must be to succeed at anything in life, no matter how hard one works. One must be lucky to be able to work. One must be lucky to be intelligent, physically healthy, and not bankrupted in middle age by the illness of a spouse. Consider the biography of any self-made man, and you will find that his success was entirely dependent on background conditions that he did not make and of which he was merely the beneficiary. There is not a person on earth who chose his genome, or the country of his birth, or the political and economic conditions that prevailed at moments crucial to his progress. And yet, living in America, one gets the distinct sense that if certain conservatives were asked why they weren't born with club feet or orphaned before the age of 5, they would not hesitate to take credit for these accomplishments. Even if you have struggled to make the most of what nature gave you, you must still admit that your ability and inclination to struggle is part of your inheritance. How much credit does a person deserve for not being lazy? None at all. Laziness, like diligence, is a neurological condition. Of course, conservatives are right to think that we must encourage people to work to the best of their abilities and discourage free riders wherever we can, and it is wise to hold people responsible for their actions when doing so influences their behavior and brings benefit to society. But this does not mean that we must be taken in by the illusion of free will. We need only acknowledge that efforts matter and that people can change. End quote. True meritocracy is an illusion. We live in a world where equality of opportunity, as progressives see it, and dream of it, can likely never exist. But I fear that won't stop rich, elite liberals from telling poor conservatives, learn to code or eat shit. What would a good solution be then? I talked about it a bit earlier, and will quote the cult of smart yet again. What we should be working toward is not some unachievable equality of opportunity, but the elimination of the very ideal of just deserts altogether. We must move to a vision of human equality based on the equal right of all people to the good life. We must leave the idea of deserves behind." End quote. And here's an idea that might help you wrap your head around what this type of vision of human equality would look like. I think the veil of ignorance can help lead us to a logical conclusion that may jar us awake from our default state of equality of opportunity. What is the veil of ignorance? The veil of ignorance is a thought experiment first proposed by philosopher John Rawls, where basically you decide how you'd want the government to be run in a society based on one simple criteria, or criterion. The criterion is that you don't know who you'll be in this society you've created. You don't know what ethnicity you'd be, what gender, what your social status is, what job you have, where you live. That's the veil of ignorance. Your personhood is chosen at random, and you decide how the government runs or how the country treats all of its citizens before knowing which citizen you'll end up being. So think about that. And after just a minute or two of thinking, you might come to the conclusion that people would decide things quite a bit differently than they currently do in the real world. Things like deciding how much welfare is given to people, what rights people have, and so on. If we move to a vision of human equality based on the equal right of all people to the good life, as Freddie deBoer writes, then it wouldn't be so frightening not knowing who you'd be in society after uncovering the veil of ignorance. All right. To finish up, I want to leave you with yet another quote from The Cult of Smart. "The basic failing of our society lies in our dogged belief that we as human beings should get only what we deserve rather than what we need. This is the central dogma of the great glistening cathedral of 21st century meritocracy and the fundamental lie at the heart of the American dream. We will continue to embrace this idea because doing so enriches the already enriched, because it suits the interests of the powerful, because it is the justification of a system that causes vast suffering and then tells people it's their own fault. Thudding away in the background will be the simple fact that we are not all the same, that we have different abilities, different interests, different lives, and that not all of us were made to serve the interests of neoliberal capitalism. That fact has been ignored by those from across the political spectrum, conservatives to protect the myth of the self-made man, liberals to maintain a cheery story of the power of good intentions and the human spirit, neoliberals to support the interests of the education profiteering industry, and leftists to advance a reductive notion of human equality. Together, they amount to a conspiracy of not seeing. But the reality of human inequality will remain, and so too the need to reorganize our society because of it. End quote. All right. Anyway, thanks for listening. See you next time, whenever that may be. I may try something new for the next one. You'll know what I mean when it comes out. All right. See ya.